Hello friends, I am Chevy. Welcome to my shed. How are you doing today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Still writing. Still writing. Today, as of today, 18,973 words. I think the goal was just a little over 18,000, and I was honestly hoping to get to 20 today. I started on a scene this morning that I was dying to write. Ever since I started thinking about this book, I really wanted to write this scene, and I got there, and it took a turn, you know. And I think that's been kind of the whole journey of writing this thing is turns. Like, because I'm not planning this. This is just words. You know, this is just I'm trying the Stephen King method of I'll find the story as I write it. Because I'm kind of doing that, I've been quite surprised by a few things. And this particular scene is one of them. Partially because it's my take on the trope, on a trope. I don't want to talk too much about specifics, but in this story, we're focused in on this main character who's kind of the gruff cowboy character, the loner, takes care of himself, doesn't need anybody else pestering him or whatever, and he suddenly is left with a charge, and he doesn't want the charge, and he has to do something about it. And so this is kind of my take on that. My spin on that. This character, I didn't want the loner who needs help and finally accepts it in the end and defeats the big bad. I didn't want that. That is the trope that I wanted to avoid. The story. That story arc is a character who his flaw is that he thinks he needs to beat the bad guy, but what he actually needs is to give in to his humanity and accept the comfort or accept the help of somebody else. And that I wanted to avoid, but I also wanted to use that trope or that as part of my story. Ultimately, in the end of this story, this character has this extra person that is now, not necessarily a problem, but is a new concern. So I wanted to explore that in the way that I wanted to explore that is this character doesn't accept this charge. Like he's not, even though he has taken this charge on, he's still doesn't want it. But because of the circumstances, he has to. Not out of some sort of moral obligation or some sort of honor or anything like that. He physically has to. And it's all tied into how the magic that I've created in this world, how the magic works, and how he goes about kind of taking this charge on. Ultimately, it's a bit of a rescue, and because of the way that he rescues this person, he's now bound to that person. And so I was really excited about it. And we're excited enough that I just spent 4 minutes dodgingly explaining it to you without any detail whatsoever. And the reason is because that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to talk about this relationship. What I wanted to talk about is the writing of it. Because I am 10 chapters in now. Well, I just started chapter 10. So 8 chapters in when this all went down, and I got excited to write the scene. I've been trying very, very hard to limit this book to a single point of view character or a POV character. All of the writing advice I've ever read says for your first book, stick to one character. Just tell a one character story. Just write it and get it out of the way. And so I was like, yeah, that's fine. I can do that. And so that's why I created this gruff cowboy character who just is like, by nature of the world, he's alone. And he has to be alone, and he travels alone. So that's where I went with it. And within the last week, as I've been writing and writing more, I've started to kind of question myself and say, hold on, is this story big enough to fill a book? Like, do I even have enough material to fill this thing out? Do I now just need to start writing these little filler moments that you sometimes when you get to those books, if you've ever read a book that doesn't have a big enough story, there's this middle section where the character just moves forward and then a new obstacle and then he moves back and then he has to do a thing and then he moves forward and it's just this like, okay, why are we going through this? Ultimately, by the end of the story, it has nothing to do with anything, and you kind of walked through some things and maybe the author showed you a little bit more about the world or a little bit more about magic or a little bit more about society that you didn't understand, and that's what you got out of all of that. But for the main character, it was just a bunch of bullshit because that's what the author had to do to pad the book out. I didn't want that either. So I started thinking about how I could make the story bigger, how I could make the story wider without sacrificing my single point of view. But as I got to this point where my main character has to take on this charge, and in the way in which this has to happen, it was becoming very, very difficult to tell that portion of the story through the main character's eyes, through the main character's point of view. And so chapter 9 of this book, suddenly 18,000 words into the book, we are now switched to the secondary character's point of view. And it allowed me to write a much more rich and even emotional and heartfelt scene. It allowed me to really give the reader a lot more detail about what was happening without having to sacrifice, without having to just dump on you, here's what's happening. I got to show you through this new character's eyes, who was completely oblivious to what was happening to him, but he got to feel it and see it and understand it. And you, the reader, now got to feel it and see it and understand it. You, the reader, now got to learn a whole lot more about this weird, magic system that is created here. And it was wonderful. And so I guess now I have a second point of view character, and I'm going to carry him forward. And I think that his storyline is definitely going to pad this book out quite a bit, because he still has to go through a very substantial change before he can move on. And whether he travels with the main character or not, I'm not sure. We'll figure that out later. But it was really wonderful. And so I guess all of that is to say that, all of the advice says don't do what I just did. Don't just single point of view character, just tell your story. But I just couldn't. The story told me no. The story kept fighting me. In fact, the lead up to this scene, the lead up to the portion where this character needs to be saved, I really wanted to tell that through his eyes. And instead, I decided to stick with the main character and have him just kind of oblivious to the fact that something was going on very near to him until the last possible moment. And then, then all this stuff happens. But I think that in this instance, the writing advice is wrong. And I got to remember that that's exactly what it is. Advice. It's not a rule. It's not a construct. It's just advice. It's just a guide. But man, that was a fun scene to write. I can't wait until I get past this, and maybe someday one of you will get to read it. Maybe. We'll see. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking and commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is demotic. It is an adjective meaning language used by ordinary people. Eileen always avoids demotic because she does not want to be mistaken for someone from the middle class. Demotic. D-E-M-O-T-I-C. I am writing very demotic.